Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, call me Noctis, and I am back with the next section of the 7 Sin series. Though these will all be under the title of Vices and Virtues, where we will be addressing the opposing vice and virtues of the sins. It has been a while. No? I know I spoke a great deal in the sins videos about how I couldn't wait to start this portion of them, but then here it is quite a little bit later. Yeah, that is really down to all of the planning that went into these, and admittedly the script. The script has taken me quite a while with this one. And I have started this ahead of time, as always, yet hardly imagine this will end out a short video. I entirely don't know if I would be able to fill the time of this video either, but I suppose there was only one way to find that out. See, these will take a little bit of a different format going forward, as these may get a little long. The sins were fun to do on their own, with one drawing per video. Yet the next 7 I'm going to be including the opposing vice and relating virtue in one video, to make it easier to fully explore both sides in greater detail, rather than having to split it up between those 2 videos. So just to clarify, this video will have 2 complete drawings in it, and I should have a fair amount to say. Hopefully. If not, I just begin to waffle like I usually would, or I use music to finish the rest off. Then the order I will be taking for these is rather routine. I want to start the video off with the vice, which in this case is inferiority, and then go into the relating virtue, which in this case is self-respect. But these videos might get a little long after some of the previous sin videos, which were just one drawing a video, but it may mean that certain clips are faster than I've used before, so things may move a little bit quicker. I will simply have to see what happens, though with all of the changes it will allow me to better discuss the 2 elements in relation a bit easier, and sort of explain where I'm drawing my inspiration from for each of them. Now it is worth mentioning that these will be spread out a little as well. I release the sins 2 at a time over 2 different weeks. With these ones, they'll have videos between them. I took a break from this set before, and doing the next one will be a minute, with the other ones between them as well. Just with the time that goes into each of the drawings, the script, and the other elements of the video that I end up needing to work out. And a final note before we get into the fun part of this video. If there is any background noise in this video, I apologise. I try to normally record sound stuff during the days when people are out of the house, yet that isn't exactly possible this week, so there may be a few sounds here and there I will do my best to avoid. Hopefully the disclaimer is for nothing, but it is worth getting out of the way early on. I mean, I'll be completely honest here, I've already recorded half of this audio once before, yet I realised I was accidentally using the wrong microphone, so it was utterly unusable. But I think that is all that I need to cover here before we just get into stuff. So, inferiority. I've put it as the rival and opposite of pride, yet ultimately, what do I mean by this? How is it the rival, and why is it such a bad thing to oppose one of the 7 sins? All of these are questions I will come to answer here. Hopefully. Maybe. It depends if I am able to get a point across or stay on track. It is hardly unfair to think that most people will struggle with their self-worth at some point of their life. Whether it is for a short term in the face of a challenging time, or a longer term struggle that's more present. That isn't what I mean here. By the term inferiority, I more refer to lacking any sense of self-worth. But similar to pride, it's then continuing in that mindset, and making no effort to change or improve on it once identifying it as an issue, for it to be discussed more as a moral aspect. Low self-esteem is something seen in a range of environments. Doubting yourself and being uncertain is really just normal. I know I've said this before, but it's something that most people will understand at one time or another. Yet a low self-esteem doesn't mean that there isn't any. Even if someone thinks that it does. There will still be times that a low self-esteem can put themselves first and put themselves forward, no matter how uncomfortable it may make them. It may bring issues and challenges, yes, but not to the degree of utterly lacking any self-worth. and they are ultimately still able to face those challenges and continue on. The idea I was working with when drawing was that it sees the world before them. Lacking any sense of self-worth can often mean someone will put others before themselves and their own needs, beyond the normal means of being selfless or considerate. It actually crosses closer to another vice we will explore later of sacrifice. And I know putting others first sounds really good. I mean, we have to help others out in life, and it's one way we build all sorts of connections. Favours and agreements are just part of life, and there really is nothing wrong with that. Yet, putting everyone before yourself will eventually begin to neglect your own needs or wants, since the person thinks that everyone else should be before themselves, rather than pride's issue of thinking that you should be before everyone else all of the time, and that other people should also put you before themselves. It's damaging to the self in that manner, where you ignore yourself to favour other people, thinking they are worth it and you are not. In a similar vein, it can also lead to problems with accepting or asking for help, continuing to struggle yourself because you wouldn't want to burden anyone else. Something common with people who have low self-esteem as well. Now, it also comes across in the way people talk. A prideful person may boast and talk of themselves greatly and extensively, to a point of annoyance for those around them if conversations only focus on the other. On the opposite, inferiority may mean that someone talks down of themselves, insulting or discrediting their achievements because they can't see the worth in them, or don't believe themselves worthy of the praise offered. This too can become a point of annoyance for those around, also leading to an element of isolation that can feed into the cycle above. Now, I also want to introduce the virtue I'm working with here, since it fits better rather than waffling for a while and waiting until I get to that section of the video. Yet, I saw the middle ground, and virtue, as self-respect. At the core of this is the understanding of your own worth and importance, but also being able to acknowledge the people around you where it is needed or that you can. And this, to me, is a point that people can work on throughout their life and change as they wish or as they need. It's the middle ground of always putting another's worth before your own and always putting yourself before others. You can look at a situation and be able to tell when you need to come first, or when another can come first, or needs to come first. And in terms of self-view, since that was the main thing with pride, it is being able to see your positive traits and qualities that another may see in you, or that you just like about yourself. But also being able to admit where you may need to change, or if you're at fault, or aren't quite happy with something, but still being alright with that. Pride as a vice and sin is thinking yourself too high, to a point where you may not be at fault. Another must, another may. Inferiority is then only seeing the flaws of yourself, so that you are at fault and below everybody else. So the middle ground is seeing both. One way that I've always understood it was via the myth of Icarus, since I heard that when I was rather young. It was one of the first myths I was introduced to. Fly too high, think yourself too tall, and you will fall because of the arrogance. Fly too low, thinking yourself not worth it, and you'll become weighed down and still fall. By existing in that middle ground, you can continue. Reach safety in terms of the myth. I can't remember where I first heard the myth, to be honest, but it was used by someone to explain the point I'm trying to make here. This middle is an ideal, in my opinion, as it doesn't promote the idea of lowering yourself to another's whim whenever they demand it, allowing you to set your own boundaries and cater to your needs in moments of selfishness, where you are your first priority. Yet doesn't promote complete disregard for others. Noticing where someone else should come before you, or that another's needs are best put over another and yourself. With all of that said, I can finally touch on the actual drawings themselves at this point and look at the video. In terms of the environment, I did want to keep it rather consistent between the trio. It made sense too in an unplanned way, I mean, I didn't really intend all of it, yet I knew that there would be a bit that connects the three. It ended up with a lot joining the three together, which did admittedly work out. Though, in terms of inferiority in the environment, I wanted to keep the forest scene and make it somewhat darker, or more evident that they are alone, or at least feel more alone. There isn't anyone there to help them for similar reasons to Pride, and that they are rather small compared to their surroundings. Pride had their mirrors, the bushes and such, trying to give it a sense of scale, though it could have admittedly been a little clearer. The scale of Pride is more evident in the picture with all of the sins together. Though in their individual image, they then had their dress and the contrast between them and the background, which pushes their importance and draws the eye. The yellow against the dark background almost demands attention. Inferiority, in contrast, is meant to be small, closed off in a way that Pride just isn't. Hence why the trees occupy most of the second half, and the vines or flowers are what draw the eye there. In the lower, they're in a patch of roots and brambles, sharp twigs that imply the harm this sin may cause, as it's meant to look as if they're disturbing the ground. I chose to keep them small with the way that even the bushes tower to their height. For self-respect, I came to combine the two. I keep the trees of inferiority with the flowers and the vines that they both have, yet I tie in the bushes at their feet from Pride. The main difference with them is that they're central to the page and visually ties in elements from both of the other two. Things like the leaves of Pride and the aspects of her dress. But also the hair from inferiority and the eyes. Though really the eyes tie them all together since I went with quite a similar tone for them all. If anything, Pride's ended up to be more vibrant of the lot. See, going back to the environment for a moment, the forest ended up fitting them all quite well. Pride as a subversion of my first idea and instinct, and inferiority as almost a more typical idea. The self-respect it was mainly to keep the theme between them, yet it also tied into the peace of a forest and that it is away from eyes and images of society. This allowing people to be themselves and take a break, which was a useful implication I wanted to make. Now, since I've touched on it a small amount, I want to move into the characters. See, I have explained how self-respect is a middle ground and an understanding between the other two, in that they have elements taken from both. I have also then got a video on Pride where I explained my ideas there. So it only really leaves inferiority to touch on here. Now, with them, I wanted to keep it similar to Pride in some sense. I wanted them to be visually similar, but different in ways that weren't just colour. It's where the crown came from. It is like Pride's, yet it differs in that it has broken down and crumbled like their idea of self has over time. You'll see that self-respect has two versions I consider. The first version is the crown that sits on their head, which comes to a point like the triangles, yet it has a circular section that kind of threw the whole thing off. In the end, I went with my second option that I sort of made up more as I went, since the first one didn't feel right. It ended up similar, a halo almost, and still a crown motif, yet it tied in the points of Pride a lot more and parts of the triangle since it did come to be part of the Pride set. Pride siblings? I haven't quite worked out how to refer to these yet other than the vices and virtues of them. Let me know what terms you prefer. The set? The siblings? Who knows? Moving on either way, the other thing I did was give inferiority a more muted eye colour, yet continued with the yellow. It's also seen in the dress where I kept the short sleeves from Pride, yet increased the collar, bringing it up closer to their neck and added a more physical collar. Which is kind of how self-respect came to have a mix of these. But I also changed the dress to a purple since it blended into the environment more than the yellow. Pride wants to stand out. Wear yellow in the dark to draw the eye, This one doesn't. The final bit for inferiority to really touch on is then the tears. See, this is the main idea I had for inferiority from the very beginning. They are a figure with no value to themselves. An attitude I have already said could lead to putting others first, but also one that obscures who you may be. There could be parts missing or unclear that don't make sense or fit, and others that go entirely overlooked. It made sense to me to include these rifts in their person, where there is just a mist and void below the skirt, as if it doesn't quite know how to fill in those sections when a person doesn't really matter. It is something I had fun with and actually took from one of the sins, wrath, since it didn't end up suiting them, or the idea that it stemmed from would have been too much for this series, since I am going for quite a toned down image. On that note as well, I realised I haven't explained one aspect of self-respect. They do end up holding a shield, something I considered removing in their later stages, yet thought of quite early on with the sketches. See, I liked this idea of self-respect being able to visually protect themselves and their view of self, and as such decided on the shield. It was meant to be a bit more complicated, with a middle section and all these different parts, but in the end I kept it rather simple. It ends up as more of an impression before anything, since the details I considered didn't fit it by the time I got there. I mean, as I've touched on, I was going to add a middle plate to push the shield element, but even going back after I finished recording and trying it never ends up looking quite right. So I instead leave it rather simple and do end up letting it remain as an implication of defence. Now, still on theme with the characters and art, I want to touch on the poses of each for a while. See, to go over Pride once more for those of you unaware, they are alone without an audience, posing for no one in an environment uncared for and overgrown, since Pride is ultimately focused on the self. There doesn't need to be another to cater to it, as the person is already assured that they are before and above all else around them. It's why their pose is grand, and they are elevated from the bottom, where many of the other sins are cut off before the feet, or simply lack them. I'm looking at you, Lust. This came to influence inferiority as they are also standing in a similar environment. Yet they are standing in a way that is much more closed off. They hold their arm and hide behind their hair as if the attention is something they'd rather avoid. For self-respect, they stand welcoming others in, waving to them in such a manner that they are more approachable and genuine, almost as if they're in the middle of a normal action, whilst still standing with a shield to protect themselves and their worth. All of this was really done to push something about the characters, as expected, and may be straightforward, but I am rather happy with how they all ended up being similar in some sense too. Pride is open. On the other hand, inferiority is closed and unsure. They counter each other with self-respect in the middle and acting as the midpoint of the two, while still resembling both of the sins in their own ways. And yes, I know I have sort of implied all of this when talking about the environment, but come on, I have like 45 minutes to talk for, so I have the time to clarify everything I want to, and probably extra. But that does lead us into a little section of colour here. There isn't much to really touch on with this, since it is rather straightforward. Pride has always been purple, so I knew that the Vice and Virtue would be following these colours as a form of visual ties, but would need to use them in different ways. It's why inferiority ended up rather dark, using darker yellows and purples rather than the vibrant ones featured through Pride. For the middle point, I would then draw colours from either side. Pride's noticeable in their yellow dress, a colour to rival greed, and yet inferiority preferred a purple dress. Self-respect then got the layers of each. Their dress is yellow from Pride, keeping elements like the neckline of it, with the purple accents of the various layers seen from inferiority. It's something I enjoyed playing with and how they're used so far. It's also something that I'm looking forward to with the upcoming Vices and Virtues, Some may be a challenge. That's also what I can't wait for. So keep an eye out, because hopefully they will be soon-ish. Now, before we move into any music or the end of the video, whichever comes first, I do want to touch on why I didn't just call it humility, and use the opposing heavenly virtues. I mean, I called the sins what they were, so it would have made more sense if I just flipped it to the virtues. And rather simply, my main reason is that I don't want the religious connotations that come through with the virtues. Researching them originally did tie them very closely to their origin, surprising exactly nobody. And I simply felt more comfortable doing it in this manner rather than approaching them. I instead speak about virtue ethics and that model of morality, despite the many flaws it has. Yeah, that is mainly used to illustrate the way that I'm approaching each of these themes and topics. And I will say this now, don't be surprised if at some far further and later date I decide to revisit the topic of the 7 sins as either characters, demons, or something. They are something that I've had an interest in and discussed a fair amount with friends, which may mean I get a new idea on how to depict them at a later date. Though that will be far in the future, where I may feel more comfortable exploring different routes with them, since this time I did want to keep them rather tame? Calmer? I don't really know the word for it, just that I didn't want to push them into realms of gore or discomfort. But back to morality and stuff like that. I wanted to explore the shades of grey where the sins and virtue model offers a black and white view on these matters. There is one that is good, that people should strive and work for, whilst there is another that people should avoid at all costs. It reminded me a lot of my philosophy lessons, where, admittedly, most of them ended up with long debates and out of context conversations, rather than actually getting to the work we were meant to do. But one topic for morality had included discussions of black and white views rather than those exploring shades of grey. Yes, the one right, one wrong systems were easier to think about and discuss, yet those with more shades of grey led to more of a discussion and applications. A lot more bickering too, but that was just the spirit of the class. This had been one of those conversations someone randomly brought up, that traits in either extreme can go wrong and do more harm than good. Though some of my reasoning was also with my understanding of the words or how I think of them today. Humility wasn't really one of those. I did consider using it for the virtue here, yet felt that self-respect simply fit my understanding better. I will likely touch more on this matter, though, in the right and virtue of lust, since that is the soonest it may come up. It was also more of a personal call. I mean, when drawing, I kept having to consider the vice and virtue and who it was that is making these choices. It has always been a question of mine as to who creates or decides morality, since it is something that differs between people. Even matters that seem horrific and unthinkable to some, actions entirely morally wrong, are still done by others, like murder. One of my main battles with this script has been this question. I mean, I'm talking of my opinions and thoughts and understandings. I talk from my inspirations, like a structure from virtue ethics, and my own idea of what right and wrong may mean. I don't really follow virtue ethics, but it's really the best model that I can use to explain the vice and virtue idea. Though this all means that another may disagree with me, and very likely does. I used to know people who did see things as one or another and didn't acknowledge the space between. And I've known people who only see the space between. I began being able to work on them when I accepted that it would be my current view of things, and that it is my current thoughts that may change next year or as soon as next week. So for now, the answer to who makes the moral judgment is simply that the individual does. How we see things is up to ourselves, and we all see and understand things differently. Especially in something like pride and inferiority. It is ultimately our own idea of ourselves, so only we can really make judgment on that. Others can make judgment of how they perceive that, but how we are is really how we see ourselves. Now, with all of that being said, that is all I have for this week and this video. I hope you have enjoyed and join me next week where I will not be doing this set, but will be working on something rather fun. Hopefully. There are two ideas that I have to pick between still, but they are both still fun, whichever I end up going with. All of that said, have a wonderful day, and I do hope to see you next time.